Davidson. I like this, Davidson.
It's the Bottom Line Podcast
with your host,
Davidson Baker.
Good evening. My name is Davidson Baker, and this is the Bottom Line Podcast. If you didn't know and now you know, motherfucker, you should have known in the first place. However, if you didn't, thank you so much for joining me. So, let's get started. So starting out with, obviously, the headliner of this weekend, we had Dustin Poirier and Eddie Alvarez in a rematch. And Dustin Poirier got Eddie Alvarez out of there. I believe it was 4 minutes and 9 seconds. I'm looking to get an official 4 minutes and 5 seconds of round two. The thing everybody's talking about this fight, obviously, is the stand-up. Eddie Alvarez poked Dustin Poirier with an illegal 12-6 elbow. Even though it didn't land directly on the head of Dustin Poirier, it landed on his shoulder. And here we are again discussing some sort of controversy following a meeting between Dustin Poirier and Eddie Alvarez inside the octagon. You know, I don't disagree with what Mark Goddard did standing them up. I think Dustin Poirier was definitely, and this goes without being said, was the beneficiary of the stand-up because he was mounted against the fence by Eddie Alvarez. So when Alvarez, it was a really awkward mount, a really awkward mounted position because Poirier was almost had like his back upright against the fence a little bit. And so when that 12-6 elbow was thrown, and even though it didn't land, it was clearly 12-6 and it was obviously an illegal strike. So now, no matter how you feel about the 12-6 elbow rule, obviously more people disagree with it than some, and I would be willing to throw my name into the hat of that sample size. I think Mark Goddard made the right decision, in my opinion. Because no matter how you feel about the rule, and no matter if the elbow didn't land on his head, it's still a rule. It's 100% still a rule. Now, you could disagree with me, and that's fine. I don't care. This is my opinion. Dustin Poirier was the beneficiary of a 50-50 call that a lot of people and some refs wouldn't make, given the fact that A, it did not land, and B, it landed on his shoulder somewhat. So Mark Goddard explains to Dustin Poirier that he was taking the position away. And it was a pretty dominant position. There aren't really any positions in MMA more dominant than mount. If any, period. And then obviously shortly after that, Dustin Poirier finished the fight with a huge knee, a solid left hand that sent Eddie Alvarez backing up, and then they were just swinging for each other against the fence until Poirier put him away. Missed on a couple of head kicks, but ultimately ended up getting the job done. So congratulations to Dustin Poirier there. Moving along to the co-main event, though. How about Jose motherfucking Aldo Jr.? Man. It was so incredibly heartwarming to see Jose Aldo, and I was at his last fight in Detroit. He for a while, people have said that he has looked like the man who was mentally scalped by Conor McGregor. And what's happened with him since then? He came back and systematically beat down Frankie Edgar at UFC 200. Then he went on to lose his next 2 fights to Max Holloway. What I think this tells us is how good Max Holloway is. So Max Holloway is a combined 3-0 against those 2 guys. Aldo doing that to Stevens and hitting him with those 2 crunching body shots that he could not recover from really told me more about Max Holloway than it did Jose Aldo. I knew Jose Aldo was going to come out in this fight cracking. And he was hurt. Very early on, he was hurt. But again, the thing that I learned more than anything else here is that how good Max Holloway is. He beat him twice. Man. So congratulations to Jose Aldo. I think he should take on the Cub Swanson Renato Moicano winner. Easy. Moving on. Joanna Jacek gets a clean sweep on all 3 judges' scorecards, 30-27 times 3, to advance past 5th-ranked Tiny Tornado Tisha Torres. In, a lot of people are up in arms about that fight, thinking that Tisha should have at least gotten a little more love. Some people have said they even believe Tisha should have won. Are you out of your mind? No. She controlled her against the cage? Okay. So? Did she do any damage at all against the cage? No. Was she quickly turned around to where her fence was pressed against, to where her back was pressed against the fence, and took lots of hellacious elbows from Joanna in said position that she quote-unquote was controlling? Yes. And as far as Joanna Jacek goes, she really thinks that she beat Rose in April. She really thinks that. I personally didn't have it 4-1. I had it 3-2. I had it 48-47 with rounds 3 and 4 going to Joanna. And the takedown in round 5 from Rose definitely won her that fight on my scorecard, but clearly not. Anyway, Joanna really thinks she beat Rose that night. It's starting to get a little irritating. Because she will not give this whole, bow down to me, I am the strawweight queen. She will not give it a rest. And I'm a huge Joanna Jacek fan. My girlfriend is a gargantuan-sized Joanna Jacek fan. But, dude, come on. Give it a rest, man. In her post-fight interview, she interrupted Mike Bone like 6 times. She interrupted John Morgan a couple times. She interrupted Mark Ramundi a couple times. She was interrupting everyone. When someone would be like, blah, 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 question, boom, interrupted by Joanna. I mean, I get it. Like, we're watching these mixed martial artists put their immediate health and somewhat cohesive betterment for better or okay, let's see. Well, I'm trying to pick my words carefully here. They're putting, let's just do it the easy way. They're putting a lot on the line every time they step in that octagon to kind of depict themselves as these glorified gladiators inside of a cage. So I get it. Some of these guys are going to think that their shit doesn't stink. I mean, that's understandable. But it gets old. Especially when you come to figure out that they really are believing the lies that they're saying. I really think Joanna Jacek has looked at herself in the mirror enough times and told her that she beat Rose in April that she really believes it at this point. She didn't. And she says she's going to get the next title shot. No, you're not. Unless you move up to 125. I could see her getting a title shot at 125. Not at 115. How she would fare, though, against Shevchenko is kind of marveling to think about. Because they fought multiple times in Muay Thai, and Shevchenko beat her all those times. I don't know. I like Joanna Jędrzejczyk. I definitely like her more inside of the octagon rather than outside. Let's just put it that way. So, last fight on the main card, Alexander Hernandez took out Canada's own Olivier Aubin-Mercier in a fight that I was much so looking forward to, and a fight that I was dead wrong about. You know, I thought that Aubin-Mercier was going to be able to use his experience to kind of glide past the relative newcomer Hernandez, but man, Hernandez looked really good again. Really good. Now let's see what he can do against top 15 competition. Maybe an Islam Makhachev who looked, well, actually Makhachev isn't in the top 15, but I think that would be a good opponent for him because Makhachev is definitely top 15 caliber. You know. A little tired. Going to be interesting to see what the future holds for Hernandez. Other highlights on the main card that I thought were awesome, or not on the main card, on the card overall that I thought were awesome. I thought obviously Islam Makhachev was awesome. I thought Hakeem Dawodu looked fantastic. Ion Kutalaba got a Gadzhimurad Antigulov out of there in the first round, which was pretty awesome. The John McDessie-Ross Pearson fight was phenomenal. That was an incredible fight. Caitlin Chookagian got a very much deserved and very big win for her over Alexis Davis. How about Dustin Ortiz? Oh, man. The head kick that was partially blocked, too. You know, I mean, jeez. Getting Matheus Nicolau out of there, who me and a good friend of the Bottom Line podcast, MMA Today's Max Friedman, believed on last week's episode was definitely one of the locks on this card. And we both liked Nicolau's upside a lot. Dustin Ortiz turned that ass around. And now, if you think about it, he just beat Alexander Pantoja as well, who is another up-and-coming name. And he was saying in his post-fight interview, he said, no more up-and-comers, man. I keep sitting these guys down. It's hard to argue with him at this point. He deserves... But here's the problem, though. When you go down the flyweight rankings... Here, let me take a look. When you go down the flyweight rankings... Let's see here. So Ortiz is sitting at 9. You go above him. 8, Pantoja, who he beat. 7, Wilson Hayes, who he's lost to. 6, John Moraga, who he's lost to. I believe he lost to him. Here, I'm going to pull up his record too. Dustin Ortiz. John Moraga. Where? Yeah, who he lost to. UCA Formiga, who he lost to at 5. But then number 4, Ray Borg, he beat. Then Joseph Benavidez, someone he lost to. And then above him, you have, obviously, the number 1 contenders area of Cejudo and Pettis. I don't know, man. I mean... Pretty interesting situation for Ortiz. Maybe give him a second crack at one of those guys up there. I don't know. I don't know.
Overall, a solid card. I would say so myself. The viewership ratings would not agree with me, though. UFC on Fox 30 does. I need to pull a source on this while I can. It does the worst ratings in the history of the UFC on Fox series, which floored me, to be honest with you. Because if you compare it to the other Fox cards that have happened this year, you got 27, 28, 29, and 30. The last one obviously headlined by Poirier also with Justin Gaethje. I think that one, I'm pulling up the numbers right now. That one, the main event's awesome. Co-main event on that card was... I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I know... Oh, yeah, that was Carlos Condit and was supposed to be Matt Brown, but ended up being Cowboy Oliveira. Then in February in Orlando, you had Jeremy Stevens, who was the co-main event on this, against the consensus greatest featherweight of all time, Jose Aldo, against Josh Emmett, who the fight before that was the first fight on Fight Pass. And then in January, UFC on Fox 27 from Charlotte, North Carolina, was a rematch between Jacare Souza and Derek Brunson. I think the co-main event was Andre Fili, Dennis Bermudez, Drew Dober, and Frank Camacho were on that main card. Anyway, from the information I have provided you, it should stun you 100% given the face value that this is the lowest rated UFC on Fox installment ever. So, this is weird. So MMAfighting.com reports that it's the second. Oh no, it was the lowest. With only 1.6 million viewers. 18% down from the July show last year, which was UFC on Fox 25 in Long Island, headlined by Chris Weidman versus Kelvin Gastelum. Sheesh, man. And you had Joanna on there too, and the show in July on Fox 2 years ago, Holly Holm versus Valentina Shevchenko, did almost twice as many viewers. I don't really understand exactly why this is. I really don't have a good arrow to point towards what caused it. I have a couple of theories. Could it do with lack of promotion, being that, what do you do whenever you're in a relationship and you know that it's getting ready to end, and you see the future girlfriend possibly on the horizon, and in this case, that future girlfriend is ESPN, and the girlfriend you can't wait to end things with is Fox. Are you going to continue to put out the same exact amount of effort into keeping the current girlfriend happy? Your eyes are already on a completely different prize. What's the point? The same could be said with how this card might have been promoted. I feel like this card might have not been promoted because the talent and the star, maybe not the eye-popping star power, but there is legitimate UFC star power on that main card. Eddie Alvarez headlined the biggest gate in UFC history. Dustin Poirier has fought in the UFC 21 times. Jose Aldo is the consensus greatest featherweight of all time. And Joanna Jędrzejczyk is the greatest strawweight champion of all time. They've all been a part of big pay-per-views. They've all been in big fights. They have all done and paid their dues in the sport of MMA, including inside the promotional banner of the UFC. The UFC on Fox 30's overnight ratings were the worst in series history, and they were even lower than Jacare Brunson 3 events ago. The sport isn't growing anymore. They set the record for the most viewers was on the very first installment with Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos, and that's it. It was never topped. And Dana White says all the time, I like breaking records. He never broke that one. in a good way. I really just don't know. It doesn't really hurt the UFC right now for sure. However, when they move over to ESPN and have a majority of these fight night cards on ESPN Plus, and people aren't paying that $5 a month to tune in, they will start to reap the doubts. You know? And they're trapped in that till 2024. Saturation is a little bit of an issue, I would say. There's so many cards. There's so many events. It's not special anymore. I don't know, but still, with all of the reasons that I have given to you, and what my final point about it that I think could make a feasible theory is that the UFC needs Conor McGregor. Eyes of the casuals were beamed on the sport like never before when Conor McGregor was relevant and active inside of the octagon. Look at the numbers. People wanted to know what was happening surrounding the Notorious One when he was actively fighting in the UFC. Ever since he's been gone and taking a break, the numbers have plummeted across the board in terms of eyeballs. And I'll bet you the numbers of, I will bet you the number of illegal streams is higher than ever before for pay-per-views. We'll see what happens if Conor can come, if something can change once Conor returns regarding the surrounding environment of the UFC. And that brings me now off of the UFC Calgary review and onto current events and new fight announcements before I get into the preview of UFC 227. It's finally almost here, and I believe we can feel it. Khabib Nurmagomedov and Conor McGregor finally seem as though they are getting ready to make it official and to enter camp with the other on one's mind. The sport of MMA, let alone the UFC, the sport of mixed martial arts as a whole needs this. Needs this so bad. In a time where the UFC's biggest names and largest draws are all either on the shelf or representing other signatures on their pay stubs, i.e. Ronda Rousey, or on the shelf, i.e. John Jones, like a George St. Pierre. Brock Lesnar's coming back, but he can't come back until 2019. Plus, Lord knows if he'll be able to pass USADA tests up until March if that ship is run straight. And even given all of those names that I've splattered across the windshield at you, none of them compare to the illustrious aura that Conor McGregor carries when he walks into a press conference. And while it's unlikely, he might be doing that once again tomorrow at the UFC's planned quarterly press conference, where there have been rumored to be up to a dozen or more fighters headed to the stage to take their seats and preview upcoming fights in the UFC. Now, where I could possibly contradict my earlier point about the UFC being in need of having Conor for the betterment of its other events. In contrast to that, if Conor and Khabib show up to that press conference tomorrow, if somehow, some way it's kept tight-lipped enough to where Conor and Khabib walk behind the curtain or walk out from behind a curtain tomorrow and stun everyone in attendance and everyone watching on Fight Pass. In the event of that happening, all of your other fighters on stage, every other mixed martial artist with an upcoming headliner or co-headliner in their near future is going to get asked at most 1 or 2 questions in 45 minutes. Is that good or bad for your promotion? Individually, fight by fight, probably not. But you would be stunned at what the return of Conor McGregor would probably, and with evidence backing me up, likely do to eyeballs being focused back onto MMA's lesser known names and lesser hyped events. Regardless, I don't want to spend too much time on something that's not certain, but man, it feels close. The big presser tomorrow before the ceremonial weigh-ins. That's going to take place at around, I believe, 4:30 Eastern time, 1:30 local time in Los Angeles. Let's see. A press release I saw was sent out by the UFC, and it will... I can't find it, but regardless, there's going to be one of the big pressers tomorrow. Fighters that I have been reading and I have heard will be confirmed and sure to be there. UFC 228 headliners Tyron Woodley and Darren Till, as well as the UFC's debut trip to Moscow's headliners Mark Hunt and Alexei Oleinik. Those are the only fighters that I have come across as far as reading or hearing or slipping across news-wise through the grapevine that I know for a fact are going to be present and at their own stands respectively tomorrow. Others that will probably be there, I would assume Nico Montano and Valentina Shevchenko will be there. It would make a lot of sense for the next headliners, the next headlining acts to be there, that being, especially with it being 3 weeks out from Saturday, those fighters being Justin Gaethje and James Vick. And then when you move forward, you do have UFC 228, and you have Hunt and Oleinik there for the week after that. But then the week after that is UFC's return to Brazil and Sao Paulo. That main event has not been announced yet. The UFC has made 11 fights official for that and still needs a main event. So it's hard to believe whoever's headlining that card is going to be there unless they are doing a fantastic job of keeping secrets. If we keep going in order, then you obviously have UFC 229, potentially Khabib and Conor. UFC Moncton in Canada will be 3 weeks after that. Only one fight has been announced there, and I'll get to that momentarily. You could potentially see maybe some of the middleweights that have been slated to head towards Madison Square Garden's annual pay-per-view, UFC 230 on November 3rd, which I will get into more of that in a second as well. And I mean, the week after that, I feel like it's a little too far out. I feel like it's potentially a little too far out, but maybe not. Frankie Edgar and the Korean Zombie, or Cowboy and Mike Perry. Shot in the Dark, Amanda Nunes and Chris Cyborg. I don't know. I really don't know. This is what I like, though. I like to be surprised. So that will bring me into starting on this podcast and going forward, since this is now a weekly thing. I'm going to, right before my event previews, go over some new fight announcements that have taken place in the past week. These fights following in order. This will go in order of event succession, starting with UFC Fight Night 135 in Lincoln, Nebraska on August 25th, all the way to the UFC's return to Madison Square Garden on November 3rd. In that order, Here are the fights that have come down the pipeline this week. On August 25th at Pinnacle Bank Arena in Lincoln, Nebraska, UFC Fight Night 135, which is headlined by Justin Gaethje and James Vick. There was a change made today. I didn't report myself. It was first reported by Rafael Mourinho of Combache.com and was confirmed to sources of my website, the website I write for, the MMA Takeover.com, that Antonio Braga Neto has pulled out of his fight with Ultimate Fighter 23 middleweight winner Andrew Sanchez. That fight, I believe, is slated to be on the main card for that event. Probably given Andrew Sanchez's proximity to home. He's from Missouri. Braga Neto is out for what was told to me and what was reported originally by Combache being undisclosed personal reasons. So stepping in for Antonio Braga Neto will be Marcus Perez. Marcus Perez is the former LFA middleweight champion and is coming off his first UFC win at UFC 224, a first-round submission that gave James Boknovich his walking papers. Another fight announced, which, as it looks like right now, could be headed towards the featured bout on Fox Sports 1. Welterweight Warley Alves takes on newcomer to welterweight and former lightweight for quite some time, James Krause. James Krause getting another relative home game. We last saw him in St. Louis, and now he'll be kind of relatively close to home again in Nebraska. Taking on a tough test, and Warley Alves, 6-2 in the UFC. He's got a mean guillotine choke. As we all know, that's a tough matchup for Krause, if you ask me, moving up to 170. Moving ahead a couple of weeks, UFC 228. This was pretty much a slew of fights were made official for this a little over a week ago, but one fight that was announced and made official within the past window of 7 days. Jim Miller will look for the fifth time now, riding a 4-fight losing streak, and given that 4-fight losing streak, it might be his last shot to do so. He will be given a shot to become the all-time leader in wins at 155 pounds. This will be his 30th step into the UFC octagon. Jim Miller will take on the man that the aforementioned James Krause defeated back in January, Alex White. So, Jim Miller is one win away from having sole possession of the most wins in UFC lightweight history. He is 3 off the pace from the most in promotional history. He's 17 wins, 11 losses, and 1 no contest. And the following week, Triple G Canelo 2 Day is also the day of the UFC's debut trip to Maharashtra. And that card is beginning to take place, and man, does it look interesting. 4 fights have been announced for that card in the past week, starting with 15th ranked bantamweight Douglas Silva de Andrade, coming off of a win over Marlon Vera at UFC Fight Night 125 in February. He will be taking on one of the hottest prospects, and there are a lot of them in this 135-pound weight class, but the home country of Petr Yan will be on their feet for the former ACB bantamweight champion when he takes the octagon in his home country for the first time and hopefully not the last. That is a great matchup, and I think Petr Yan, amongst the crop of incredibly talented future stars at 135 pounds, Petr Yan might have the brightest future of all of them. He definitely has a case up there with the Sean O'Malley's of the world as far as fight-ending knockout power in his hands. I mean, what he did to Teruto Ishihara in Singapore several weeks ago was incredibly impressive. And he'll get a chance to crack the top 15 in only his second fight. It just goes to show his level of talent. Then in the welterweight division, Thiago Alves once again getting stiffed with a very, very talented newcomer in now former, I believe if you're listening to this and you consider yourself to side towards the hardcore side of things, then you would be aware that the UFC and M1 Global squashed their beef, so to say, and drew together a partnership which saw them bring Adam Yandiev into the picture. He'll take on Krzysztof Jotko. And Thiago Alves will get M1 Global middleweight champion, 18-0, Alexei Konchenko. Man, they gave him Curtis Millender in his last fight, and now they're going to give him a guy like Konchenko. Oh, man. Really tough fight for Alves. Konchenko, not a young fighter at all in his own right either. He's 34. However, undefeated for a reason, including 10 wins in M1, and has defended his belt. He has defended his belt in M1 4 times. So there is that one. Then moving on, Mairbek Taisumov just can't seem to get a guy in the top 15 to fight him, and that yet again seems to be the case, as he will take on Desmond Green, who is coming off a unanimous decision win over Gleison Tebow in Utica. Mairbek Taisumov is one of the most frightening behemoths of knockout power, balled into a fighter at 155 pounds. Man, the guy's highlight reel of knockouts is incredibly impressive, and he'll look to add to that against Desmond Green. And I think the most intriguing of them all is the return to the UFC from one Nikita Krylov, who just became the Fight Night's global light heavyweight champion, beating Fabio Maldonado a couple of months back, now getting ready to be 3 months back. He gets a top 5 opponent right off the bat in 4th-ranked Jan Blachowicz. Really interesting for Jan Blachowicz and his camp to take this fight. I feel like maybe they knew that it's pretty well known and well versed that Krylov is world class. But that's a very interesting fight for me at 205 pounds. Kind of moving on, try to get along a little bit quickly. A 6-pack of fights have been made official for the UFC's return to Brazil, yet, like I have previously stated, still no main event. And still no whispers really of any sorts regarding said main event for their return to Brazil and the Ginásio do Ibirapuera in Sao Paulo, which was last year headlined by Lyoto Machida and Derek Brunson. And obviously Lyoto Machida would have been nice to lean on to headline again in their third straight time as a Brazil Fight Night headliner, but he is obviously with Bellator now. So the 6 fights that have been announced this week at middleweight, Talish Latish takes on, surprisingly to me, a guy getting another chance in Hector Lombard, coming off of that disappointing DQ result where he hit CB Dalloway after the bell at UFC 222. In what I believe and have reason to believe is going to end up being the co-main event, number 2, Ketlin Vieira, surprisingly taking a fight against unranked, however, just got done challenging Chris Cyborg for her 145-pound title, and former 135-pound Invicta champion Tanya Evinger. I don't see a whole lot of reasons why Vieira took that fight, to be honest with you. But then again, as far as an early prediction goes, I don't see a lot of reasons as to why Vieira should have issues with Evinger. And then at welterweight, couple of welterweights coming off wins. Sergio Moraes taking on Ben Saunders. At bantamweight, former UFC bantamweight champion and consensus number 1 pound for pound in the world, Renan Barão is really on a slide, and he'll look to end that against promotional newcomer and CES bantamweight champion Andre Ewell in his UFC debut. And then a couple of ranked versus ranked matchups starting at middleweight. Antonio Carlos Jr., after losing his fight with Derek Brunson, he'll get a home game against 14th ranked Elias Teodoro. And number 8, Neil Magny, will head into enemy territory to take on the always dangerous 14th ranked Alex Cowboy Oliveira. For UFC 229, we obviously know the big one that has whispers around is Conor Khabib, but one fight that is said to be in the works and could be done soon could potentially determine who, given that if Mighty Mouse holds serve this weekend against Cejudo, who could be next for Mighty Mouse, and the winner of this fight very well could be the one to stake claim to that. That will be a fight between number 2 Sergio Pettis and number 5 UCA Formiga. Yeah, I think for sure that's a number 1 contender fight at flyweight. I think definitely if Demetrious Johnson wins this fight against Henry Cejudo on Saturday, as many believe he will, that could very easily determine who gets Demetrious Johnson next, given that no super fights are dabbled with. The first fight was reportedly agreed to for the UFC's debut in Moncton, UFC Fight Night 138 from Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada. That is on October 27th. That will feature a heavyweight bout between a couple of up-and-coming future prospects that are looking to get back on the right track between Arjan Singh Bular and Marcelo Golm. And then obviously some big news this week at UFC 230, which is the week after that, from Madison Square Garden. Looking like a middleweight Grand Prix at this point. Yoel Romero versus Paulo Costa. Luke Rockhold and Chris Weidman in a rematch. Jacare Souza and David Branch. And Derek Brunson versus Israel Adesanya. According to UFC.com, and really, okay, so here's what I'll say because Ariel Helwani refuted this. According to UFC.com, Jacare Souza, David Branch, and Yoel Romero Paulo Costa are official, booked, done, ready to go. Ariel Helwani takes issue to that. The consensus best in the business working out of ESPN says that fight is not official and that Costa has signed it and Romero has not. So that's interesting given that fight has been made announced and official and is sitting on the UFC 230 fight card on the website. However, I've also come to believe that Brunson and Adesanya and the Rockhold-Weidman rematch are as good as finished. So that's a mouthful, but been quite some time since we had an outpouring of fights being booked, and I would imagine after this weekend with a 3-week break, we're going to be seeing a lot more. So without further ado, let's dive into the fights this weekend. UFC 227 is going to take place live from the Staples Center in Los Angeles, California. So I remember, kind of as an overview, and then I will go into my picks. Here's my overview from this event. Obviously, I don't really want to be the guy that dwells too much time, spending too much time wasting his breath talking about ratings and pay-per-view numbers, because is that really what we go back and remember when we are done watching these fights? No. We remember the knockouts, the submissions, the split decision robberies, the changing of championship belts, the rubber match. So I still feel kind of ashamed personally just going into what I did earlier about UFC Calgary's all-time low ratings, but I feel like I had to touch on that given the fact that card did not deserve that distinction. All of that being said, this card is in very grave danger of posting similar numbers on a pay-per-view buy scale. Now, is it going to do as poorly as UFC 224 did, where Nunes and Pennington hit an almost 10-year low mark? I'm not sure. I believe it was around 120 or 130K off the top of my head. I can't really remember, to be honest with you, so don't quote me for sure on that. However, I would be shocked if it did north of 150. Absolutely floored if it did 200. Okay, now that I've got that off, here is why. The timeline kind of sort of for this event is as follows. The last time that the aforementioned kind of quarterly press conferences that I briefly touched on with fighters and upcoming headliners and co-headliners alike have all sat at the same press conference in a group of about a dozen was fight week of UFC 223. There were rumblings that TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt were both on their way to Brooklyn, and with knowledge of the press conference happening Some people had to put two and two together, and Brett Okamoto was the first to do so. And shortly after that, he reported that those two were going to be the main attraction at the UFC's 227th installment of its main event. Since then, Dana White has publicly gone on record to say, if all were going to work out the way that he envisioned, the main card for UFC 227 would have included. This is Dana White literally saying word for word, quote, on the UFC Unfiltered podcast. Might not be an exact quote, but I know it's damn near close because I remember. We don't live in a perfect world, so I doubt this will happen. However, if we did live in a perfect world, this is what the main card would be. Dillashaw Garbrandt for the Bantamweight title. Fucking George St. Pierre and Nate Diaz in a 3-round fight at 155. Yeah, don't know how he ever thought that would happen. Alexander Gustafsson versus Luke Rockhold at light heavyweight. Derek Brunson versus Antonio Carlos Jr. And Yair Rodriguez versus Zabit Magomed Sharipov. Holy hell, what a card that would have been. Instead, St. Pierre Diaz never comes to terms. For obvious reasons. GSP goes on to Rogan's podcast and says himself, Diaz is not worth the risk. Would just offer him money, and that's not what he's looking for. Gustafsson versus Rockhold. Rockhold injures his shin, has surgery, he's out. Derek Brunson, Antonio Carlos Jr. Derek Brunson injured. He's out. Both of those guys have new fights. And of course, Yair Rodriguez and Zabit Magomed Sharipov. In case you guys don't remember, Yair Rodriguez was not on the UFC roster a couple of months ago due to this exact booking. There was confusion about when he was going on vacation and when he can fight and when he couldn't, and word got relayed and via whisper telephone game that we might have used to play when we were in elementary school, and by the mincing of words that could have been disguised as others, next thing you know, Lance Pugmire of the LA Times is reporting that Dana White has cut the former Ultimate Fighter Latin America winner and arguably the most talented fighter in MMA out of Mexico today. Obviously, they rekindled their differences and figured out it was a misunderstanding, and those guys will be on the main card in Dallas at 228 instead. However, just had to remind you, they should have been on this card too. On top of the main card not being what Dana could have said it was in a perfect world, Dana began to try to repair the main card's wounds with some Band-Aids. Those Band-Aids were announced on Fight Pass of all platforms, a little bit of a boost in a flyweight championship rematch between Mighty Mouse and Henry Cejudo, which we still have. Then, you also had Alexander Gustafsson's replacement opponent, Volkan Ozdemir, who they went as far as removing from his second time trying being booked against Shogun Rua at last month's UFC Fight Night 134 in Germany, which we saw did not end up well for Shogun. It's funny how the dominoes fall like that. Then Ozdemir breaks his nose. He's out. Alexander Gustafsson is remaining on the card now without an opponent. They want Ovince St. Preux. He's getting married. They want Khalil Roundtree. Gustafsson's like, nah, not interested. Too dangerous too dangerous, too much of a risk is what I would assume that they would say. Okay? Fight with Anthony Smith seems somewhat appealing. Literally minutes after Anthony Smith starts his Shogun, Gustafsson out. Injury to Daniel Cormier's dismay, and heavily criticized was Gustafsson's withdrawal by Cormier. Regardless, Gustafsson is now off the card. So how do you prepare for that? Now, if you're the UFC, you are starting to begin to prepare for a pay-per-view that's going to look incredibly weak on paper. So you move up, which, by the way, I will say before I get into my picks, already featured a fight between two strawweights who are both not ranked and have a combined 4 fights in the UFC, Polyana Viana and JJ Aldrich, who I'm telling you, I guarantee at least 40 to 45% of those who will be watching with their eyes on that pay-per-view main bill on Saturday night will turn to the person next to them and say, who the hell are these girls? Polyana Viana is incredibly talented, and they're going to know who she is soon, but not on Saturday. So, that being said, Benito Lopez and Ricky Simón is moved up to the main card in Gustafsson's place. Ricky Simón and Benito Lopez, about the best you can do. These two apparently have some, however well you would like to call it, rooted history dating back to the LFA. Ricky Simón and Benito Lopez both fought on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series in the first season. I believe they fought on the same card. No, that would be incorrect. Benito Lopez and Ricky Simón fought on the same card, or fought in the same season, Lopez getting the UFC contract and Simón not. Simón having to opt to win the LFA belt instead. Wants to follow Lopez. Calls out Benito Lopez following his win over Merab Shvalashvili in April. Good. You do the job for you. If there's a guy that called someone out, there's a guy that says he has history, let's move him up to the main card. It's about the best you can do. And then it's announced on last week's episode of the Contender Series, Benito Lopez is out. And then randomly also, here's a fight that has not even been announced or surfaced or talked about or made official whatsoever, and we're less than 2 weeks from the card. Here's middleweight. Here's a ranked middleweight, Thiago Santos, randomly taking on a guy in his debut, Kevin Holland, who didn't get a contract on the Contender Series. Oh, and by the way, they're on the main card too. Okay. That features also a featherweight fight between Cub Swanson and Renato Moicano. All right, without further ado, I got to get going, so I'm glad I could have told you kids the story of how UFC 227 came to end up sucking. I guess I might as well put the cherry on top as well, being that Walidi Biren, who fights in the curtain jerker against Marlon Vera, had his fight fall through with Barak Kandare. And then also a couple of days ago, Betch Correia and Irene Aldana's fight was scrapped due to Betch Correia not being medically cleared by the California State Athletic Commission due to an eye injury. Fun times. Fun times. without further ado, let's do some picks. Starting off with the main card, and just so you know, and I hate to repeat it for those that listen to my podcast week in, week out, and for those that do, I appreciate you. But for those that are not aware with how I do my picks, I go from bottom of the main card to the main event, and then I go from featured prelim down to the Fight Pass prelims in that order. With the main card, 13th ranked middleweight Thiago Santos. As I said, random fight that no one even knew existed until the episode before last of the Contender Series. Against, of all people, Kevin Holland, who I believe Dana White was talking about indirectly when he said at the end of the first episode of the Contender Series this summer that guys need to come out and not showboat and not be arrogant and try to finish, because Kevin Holland was arrogant and was cocky and did not look to finish his fight against a guy in Will Santiago who he clearly was a absolute nightmare for. So how he ended up getting this spot ultimately surprises me. However, debut on somewhat short notice. We really don't know how far in advance these guys knew they were going to fight. Regardless, Thiago Santos is the favorite at minus 360. Kevin Holland is plus 295 on the comeback. Santos is coming off being KO'd by David Branch in Atlantic City back in April. And I think he returns the favor and takes it out on Holland this time. I'm going to say a no-go for Kevin Holland in his UFC debut. And I'll give you Thiago Santos by second round TKO. Moving up to the aforementioned strawweight fight between Polyana Viana and JJ Aldrich. Polyana Viana is the clear favorite here. Her odds do not suggest how substantial of a favorite she is, in my opinion. Viana only a minus 220 favorite. Aldrich a plus 185 underdog. If you are listening to this and you bet on any website or go through a bookie, put some money on Polyana Viana to win this fight. Please. You will not regret it. Viana by first round sub. Moving up at featherweight, number 5, Cub Swanson, and number 10, Renato Moicano. Swanson looking to avoid losing 3 in a row. Fact-checking myself right now real quick if he has done that before in his career. Renato Moicano, only with 1 loss in his career in a fight he was winning to the, of course, now number 1 contender and undefeated Brian Ortega in a fight of the night at UFC 214. I don't think this is a good matchup for Cub either. I think Cub struggles against guys that he can easily be outpointed by, and his record might suggest against that, being that his last 5 wins have all come by decision. He has not won by way of finish since July of 2013. And for all of those reasons alone, it really scares me, because I think if he's going to beat Moicano, he's going to have to finish him, and I don't see it happening. Moicano by decision, and I think Moicano gets Jose Aldo next. Demetrious Johnson in a rematch with Henry Cejudo. Demetrious Johnson is a minus 480 favorite up against Henry Cejudo at plus 380 on the comeback. I believe off the top of my head, this is the least favorable odds Demetrious Johnson has faced in his title reign, and I think the past 3 defenses, and listening to Demetrious Johnson, if you didn't hear him on SportsCenter today, he was talking about his title defenses, and he was like, my second or third title defense in the past period. He couldn't even remember how many times he's defended his title since beating Cejudo. That is how many belts this guy has on his mantle at home. The correct answer would be 3, though, and since being over Cejudo, he was minus 1,200 against Ray Borg, he was minus 850 against Wilson Hayes, and he was minus 1,000 against Tim Elliott. Only at a calm and very subtle minus 480 against Henry Cejudo here, and I know that of any people in the flyweight division whatsoever, especially as of right now, I don't know how you could argue that there is another guy at 125 pounds that has any gasp of breath towards any conversation whatsoever of dethroning Mighty Mouse. And when I say this, I'm not saying it will happen. I'm saying there is not a guy at 125 pounds that probably has a better chance to do it, and the odds indicate it, than Henry Cejudo. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen. I like Demetrious Johnson by third round submission. And then in the main event, it's a shame that this fight, being one of the more fascinating and hyped fights of 2018 as a whole, is going to ultimately be the main attraction for a card that overall sucks balls as far as pay-per-view offerings are concerned. I think I can go as far as saying now, top to bottom, I was going to say this might be the worst pay-per-view, top to bottom, not main card offering, but top to bottom worst pay-per-view of the year. But I think Romero Rockhold might take that cake. All of that being said, it is a shame that Dillashaw and Garbrandt in a rematch of this magnitude, with the history they have and with how well they know each other, and given the paths that both of them have walked on, and given the fact that Garbrandt had Dillashaw hurt at the end of the first and would have finished him if he only had 10 more seconds. But now we have Dillashaw with the belt. And how will Cody Garbrandt respond? This is a damn near even pick'em fight with TJ Dillashaw at minus 115 and Cody Garbrandt at 105. I got to be honest with you. I am, for the large part, impartial, and I would not care and I would not mind all to a T if Cody Garbrandt did get it done. I would be lying to you, though, if I did not say I do kind of imagine myself being a little more kin to the thought of TJ Dillashaw being able to fend off Garbrandt again and fighting a contender at 135. To be honest with you, I don't know how the UFC looks by booking a trilogy fight right away and snubbing over guys who are rightfully deserving of a title shot, like a Marlon Moraes, like a Rafael Assunção. You obviously have Dominic Cruz sitting there as well. I don't know exactly how the betterment of the world of the MMA community would feel about it. My guess is not good. But it would be it would be the biggest fight in bantamweight history, period. So I don't think if you were the UFC, you could pass that up. All of that being said, I think Dillashaw has evolved. I think Garbrandt is still suffering from, not maybe suffering from the back injury, but suffering from all of the time lost, given how badly his back was hurt. And I'm going to go with Dillashaw to stay one step ahead. I think he knows Garbrandt inside and out, while Garbrandt might know Dillashaw inside and out. I'm going to go with the more experienced. I'm going to go with the guy who knows every trick in the book. I'm going to go with TJ Dillashaw in an epic fight of the year candidate to get it done by fourth round TKO over his arch rival and once longtime training partner, Cody Garbrandt. And last but not least, going down the prelims, rapid fire style, because I got to get to work personally. Featured prelim of the night, Pedro Munoz and Brett Johns. Munoz, the minus 240 favorite. Brett Johns, the plus 205 underdog. If you are a reader of the MMATakeover.com, this is the fight I have been tasked with recapping this weekend, and I'm excited about it. I like Pedro Munoz by decision. Ricky Simón will take on Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series Episode 1 from this summer. Short notice fill-in Montel Jackson. That's a damn near pick'em fight, and that could go either way. I like Ricky Simón by decision. At bantamweight again, this card is shaping up to look like a bantamweight showcase. Ricardo Ramos, who is coming off that spinning back elbow knockout at Madison Square Garden last November, he takes on Kyung Ho Kong. I like Ricardo Ramos by third round submission. The Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series train continues to find itself relevant here as Matt Sales, given what I just said, being the only one to actually sign a bout agreement with a full camp, the Alliance MMA featherweight and training partner of Jeremy Stevens and Dominic Cruz, gets his debut against Brazil's Shaman Moraes. Moraes is a slight minus 115 favorite. He is 0-1 in the UFC with his lone loss coming to Zabit Magomed Sharipov. I'm sure no one can blame him from there. I'm going to go with Sales round 2 TKO. I think that kid has power, and I think that kid has potential. I liked what I saw against Yazan Hajj on the Contender Series. I think he could be a stud at 145. And all the way down to Fight Pass, another Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series alum, Alex Perez, could go 3-0 in the UFC at flyweight and surely be calling the top 15's name against one of the most beloved and backwardsly controversial on the side of Jared the Monkey God Brooks' mistake, Jose Shorty Torres. That is the featured bout on Fight Pass. I like Alex Perez to get it done with his wrestling by decision. One of the most hyped women's strawweight debuts in quite some time is China's Weili Zhang. I think she absolutely dominates Danielle Taylor. She's 16-1 with 15 of those wins coming by finish. If you are going to keep your eye on one fighter that is making their debut this weekend, please let it be her. She is an animal. And then finally, this is arguably the easiest pick on the card, biggest favorite on the card, short notice, but much more experience, Marlon Chito Vera, getting a guy with very little big name experience in Waliji Biren from China. I like Marlon Vera to grind out to a relatively easy decision. So it should be a good one in LA. Not a very good card face value-wise or from the looks of it. However, it'll be good, hopefully, to get this card under our belts. Please praying to God on the heels of a Khabib-Conor announcement, and then heading into a 3-week break before we have Justin Gaethje and James Vick from Nebraska in 3 weeks. That being said, I will not return with an MMA edition of the Bottom Line, given that there is no need to, until, looking at my schedule, I'm going to do a brief, no, I'm not even, I will not return with an MMA edition preview-wise for another 3 weeks or so until I preview UFC Lincoln, but I will be back to recap UFC 227 briefly in a few days on episode 27, but in between then, you'll see me next on episode 26 with my main man, Kid Boy Wonder, Justin Riggs. Until then, I got to go to work, and I will hear from you guys later. For those listening, I'd like to thank you, and for my shout-out to my friends at BetMMA.Tips. That is the best betting handicapper site on the business. If you want to go look at my picks, BetMMA.Tips/DavidsonBakerGG at BetMMA Tips on Twitter. They can help you with your gambling needs, whether it is healthy or not. Again, this is Davidson Baker for the Bottom Line Podcast. Episode 25 is now in the books. I will see you next time on 26 with Justin Riggs. Until then, have a good day.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.